So welcome everybody. On the bottom, if you're on a desktop, I think it's on the mobile as well. There's a share, sorry, a chat feature. Those of you who are coming on and have video, if you can, Tracy's might turn your cameras off, but we're going to keep cameras off just to keep it focused on the presenter for this call. So there's a chat feature. We encourage you to ask questions or provide comments throughout the webinar. If you guys all want to test out your chat feature, we'd like to know, just to start off, how was your summer, or is there anything interesting that you guys did on your summer vacations? Feel free to pop it into the group chat. Anyone have any fun adventures this summer?
Does hanging out in my house count as fun, Jason? Probably not to most people.
Yeah, it was too hot in Montreal. I was up in Montreal in July as well, and I was up there during that heat wave. It was brutal. Welcome everybody. We're just kind of ramping up. For those joining, because there's a lot joining right now. Welcome to the Trust Matters webinar. This is the third in the series for the year, the fourth one total. Andrea Howe, who's a co-author of the Trusted Advisor Fieldbook, is hosting. And right now we're all just kind of messaging what we did this summer, just to test out the chat feature, and welcome everybody. And we'll be starting in just 1 minute.
We've got some interesting adventures, Jason, like pond swimming.
Sounds good. And Vegas. Who doesn't love Vegas?
Yeah. I heard that Team Summit was a great event.
Alaska fishing. Awesome. All right, so we'll get started with the actual webinar. For those who just joined, welcome. There's a chat feature on the bottom. We're going to mute microphones until the very end when we open it up for questions, if you guys want to use the audio. But in the meantime, feel free to ask questions to the open forum, or my name's Jason. You can message me directly, and take it away, Andrea.
All right, thank you so much, Jason. Thank you for being here to organize everything, and welcome everyone officially to your How to Make a Different Kind of Sales Call webinar. We're actually nearing the end of our 2018 webinar series, an experiment that Charlie and I embarked upon. Charlie Green, my co-author and collaborator, with a series of quarterly webinars. We take turns leading these. The next one coming up, by the way, is December 4th. Charlie will be leading on how to create a trust-based organization. And just in case you haven't joined in the past or don't already know, these are always recorded, and you can access our past 3 available on the website. You'll be getting links to these resources and a whole bunch of other free stuff. We are curious, by the way, what level of interest there is in continuing the webinars. This also gives us a chance to test out our polling feature. So if you would please take a moment to weigh in. This might be your very first, so you have no idea if you want us to keep going. You might be in maybe, or you might be an absolute definite. We'd love to hear from you. Continuing to get our ducks in a row, just a little bit more housekeeping in case you didn't already hear. We're going to mute everyone by default. We had more than 200 registrants for this webinar, so just keep the lines free and clear. We're going to do that. If anybody is absolutely dying to say something, by all means, I believe you have the ability to unmute yourself, or you can send a message to Jason for him to handle that for you. I love having people to talk to in these webinars. I spend most of my life leading workshops, so used to a little bit more interaction. But we do have the chat feature. Anytime you have a question, I'm not going to wait till the end to take questions, so Jason's going to help me monitor those. And if you have a resource to share, or an insight, or a comment to make, please feel free to type that in. And as I said before, this is in fact being recorded. So Tracy, that's your cue to hit the record button if you haven't already. And anybody who is officially registered through the Eventbrite site will get a link for you to review, or that you can share with anybody else at your leisure. Continuing with a little bit of housekeeping, for those of you who don't already know me, my name is Andrea Howe. I am a recovering IT consultant. I spent the first 10 years of my career working for an IT consulting firm. Many of you looking at the registration list are in the consulting industry. So we share a similar background. I've been in and around consulting for, well, it's September now, so this means it's my 26th anniversary. And I am, like probably many of you on the webinar, a reluctant salesperson. In workshops, I asked people by a show of hands, you know, who, when they were asked as a kid, what do you most want to be when you grow up? Who said, I really want to be a salesperson? Almost nobody raises their hands to say yes. And especially if you're in any kind of consulting or consultative role, you were drawn to that for the ability to make a difference because you're smart about certain areas, you're insatiably curious, there are many things that you wanted to do, and sales or BD was not one of them. So I'm in that camp as well, thankfully, and thanks to my partnership with Charlie, there's some things that I've learned that make me far less reluctant these days. Stay tuned for more on that. That's why we're here on this webinar. I am the co-author of the Trusted Advisor
Oh, we just lost your audio.
workshop. You just lost mine?
I'm sorry, I came back. I'm not sure if I'm the only one that.
Am I back?
You're back.
Okay. Okay, good. Spend most of my time leading workshops, so I see some familiar names on the anywhere from one day to many days on the trusted ship and trust-based selling. We have the trilogy of books, Charlie's name, including the Trusted Advisor, and one of my all-time favorites, Trust-Based Selling. If you found it yet, get it kind of written on sales of the hundreds and thousands of books written on sales. I've been a Trust Advisor Associates partner, Charlie, for a little 12 years, and the found called the Get Real Project, which is basically a plan to the curb and transform people to get there as a result. So enough about me. Why this topic? Why now? Sales gets a really bad rap, especially in the world of professional services, but not just limited to that world. And there's, in many ways, sad to say, there's a good reason for it. If you look up the 6 of the 8 definitions are actually appalling. They say things like they give synonyms: betray, cheat, to deliver into slavery for money. And the bottom line is people actually love to buy, but they hate to be sold. And unfortunately, in the world of professional services in particular, but not exclusively, selling becomes a necessary evil. The more you advance in your career, the more you're expected not just to do great work, but to actually bring more work, bring more clients, bring follow-on into the firm. So there's a natural tension that gets created as a result. Most of us tend to overcomplicate sales in BD. And unfortunately, the conventional wisdom that exists in terms of sales in BD, it generally does us a disservice. So my point of view, the bottom line, especially when it comes to selling, being unconventional is what gets results. More specifically, here's what you can expect to get out of today. We are going to talk about some unconventional strategies. We're going to bust a myth or two about trust building, sales, BD in the process. I'm going to teach you exactly how to make what Charlie and I refer to as a different kind of sales call, one that will be largely considerably more comfortable for most of you and generate far better and faster results than the more typical sales calls that we're expected to make. You'll build your confidence in the process, and I'm going to give you some very specific tips that you can put into practice immediately. And in fact, there will be a challenge for those who choose to take it on, and a prize for those who choose to take the challenge on and to go into action immediately.
And actually, Andrew, I forgot to mention earlier, anybody that we are going to give away a book as well for randomly to people that ask questions and comment. So feel that's another reason to participate.
In other words, we're not above bribing you for your participation, so I'm not the only one talking and engaging for the next 38 minutes or so. But here, those of you who are highly competitive, get your fingers on the keyboard, put an answer in chat. Let's see who gets this answer in first and correctly. What is the best and easiest source of leads for most B2B and services businesses. Let's see. Exactly. So we got one. Current clients for referrals. And that includes referrals inside current client organization as well as outside their organization, past clients. Now, I want you to be a really hard grader on yourself. I want you to think about the number of meaningful relationships that you've had with clients over your entire career. And by meaningful, I don't mean you were so close, you were close to, getting married. I mean, you did good work together, you had some kind of connection, there was an exchange of value, something that was positive about the relationship. I mean, when I think back over 26 years, it's a staggering number. And even if you've only been in the business world for a handful of years, there are probably at least dozens. For most of the people who are joining this webinar, there are probably hundreds. Now, the question is, how many of those have you reached out to in the last year? And if we're really honest with ourselves, the answer is nowhere near hundreds. It's probably a relatively small percentage, like maybe 2%, 5%, maybe if you're an overachiever, 10%. And when we step back and look at the reason for that, there are thousands of reasons. These are, excuses I make myself. Maybe it's awkward or uncomfortable because it's been too long. So you've got some inertia to overcome. You feel a little embarrassed or self-conscious about that. It's been so long, you've been out of touch. You don't know which value proposition to present to them. You don't know how to bring something of value because you're out of touch. You fall into the trap, kind of like I fall into the trap of, I have to have a clean desk before I can start to get any work done. I've got to have my CRM system perfectly organized and cleaned up before I can do any kind of systematic reach outs. Or, who of anybody on this webinar has extra time at the end of the day? Short answer, no one. So time gets in the way. And, if we're honest, maybe there's a more personal barrier, which is we're not sure they really want to hear from us, especially if it's been a long time. And, if we just simplify and boil this down, a lot of these reasons, the excuses, the rationale that we all come up with boils down to some form of fear. Looking salesy, being unprepared, creating awkwardness, fear of being rejected. And most of us know, and if you don't already, I'm here to tell you, fear and trust, fear is like anathema to trust. Fear immediately draws down on trust. When we're acting out of fear, as opposed to acting out of courage and doing what we know to do to build trust, then we get ourselves in miss so many opportunities to mine the richness that is available to us through our past client relationships. And by the way, it can be past collegial relationships as well. I've had people I worked with 25 years ago who've gone on to be very senior leaders in organizations that are perfect opportunities for me to have clients. So there's a simple antidote. And by the way, you'll notice I'm saying simple. So many aspects of trusted advisorship and trust-based selling. It's not actually complicated. It's ridiculously, appallingly simple, not necessarily easy. The simple antidote to dealing with this fear issue is to be in touch on a regular basis. And, most of us know, most of us do regularly engage social media conferences, industry events, meetings. These are pretty common. And we've got tools available to us now, like LinkedIn. Good grief. I was, marveling the other day at the buttons are available. I don't even have to type in a response to anybody these days. I can congratulate somebody on their new promotion with a button. Don't necessarily recommend that you do that, by the way. I think higher touch, more personal interactions are more distinctive, but there's so many easy ways to be in touch on a regular basis. But there's another way that most of us aren't doing, and that is this different kind of sales call. And the different kind of sales call, it's not a cold call, which many of you are probably breathing a sigh of relief, because who wants to do those? Very few among us, at least us reluctant salespeople. It doesn't pitch your value proposition. It doesn't require elevator speech. It's something that's really simple, not necessarily easy. It is you calling with no agenda other than to say hello and find out how they are. That's it. period. Now you notice I've got some asterisks here on the slide, so I'm going to take a moment to explain a few of those. First of all, you could text or SMS, or you could email. You could find other ways to be in touch other than picking up the phone. But I put calling because for most of us, how often do you actually pick up the phone these days? For most of us, it's rare. And the key is whatever you choose, it should have a little bit of risk embedded in it. It should be a little bit different, not the same old way that you reach out to everybody else, or you've been reaching out to that person in the past, maybe with not great results. Second asterisk, and this is really key, with no agenda. And for most of us who have been taught conventional ways of building relationships and building credibility and getting our clients to pay attention to us, we feel like it's just wrong to call without an agenda. We think that, we've been taught that we've always got to present value in some way. We've got to lead with content. And I'm here to tell you from a trust building standpoint, it simply isn't true. We have a tendency to vastly overrate the value of content and the distinctiveness of content. Now, I'm not telling you that this is permission to be a slacker and to not stay on top of your game from an industry standpoint or in terms of your subject matter expertise. But if you simply call with no agenda other than to say hello and find out how they are, you might actually be amazed at the results. And in a little bit, I'm going to share with you some true case studies, some real results that some clients of mine have gotten, even out of some situations where you think, oh, I would never be in touch in that case, or oh, that's a huge risk. How could that go anything but wrong? By the way, this calling strategy, it also, to be clear, it assumes there's a prior relationship. So I'm not suggesting that you call somebody who you just met, an executive you just met at a conference, all you did was shake hands, and you say, hey, I'm just calling to see how you are. That would seem odd. It would be weird. But assuming that you have a prior relationship and assuming there was some kind of connection, even just a little bit of caring, at least on your part, it's actually not as crazy as it sounds to call and say hello and see how they are. Now, you notice I said the word caring. There's got to be at least a little bit of caring. If you really don't care, even a tiny little bit about this person, my suggestion to you is you move on to somebody else from your roster of the people with whom you've had meaningful relationships. Because the key, even though this may feel a bit awkward or uncomfortable in some cases, the key is this has to be genuine in order to be effective. Now, hearing this different kind of sales call, when I teach this in workshops, it's not unusual to get mixed reactions, and people are usually in one of two camps. One camp would be the duh, I call it the duh camp. Either people saying, I do this already on a regular basis, great, I feel validated, I'm doing the right thing, or you know what, that makes perfect sense, I never thought of that, what an easy and simple thing to do. But there's another camp, and that's the are you crazy camp. What are you thinking? How could this possibly work? There are so many reasons not to do this, or at least a handful of really good reasons not to do it. So let's address those.
Hey, Andrew, we already have a question. You might address this shortly, but somebody asked the frequency of how often do you suggest reaching out?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And unfortunately, I'm going to give you the classic consultant answer of it depends. So, you want to, if you got a passive friend on one end and stalker on the other, we want to strike a nice balance in between. And I think it depends upon the cadence of your relationship, if there are any norms existing in your relationship, how comfortable it is, how much, to what extent the relationship is meaningful. I keep a list of people with whom I want to regularly stay in touch. And I'll be first to admit to you that I'm not as good as I could or should be at staying in touch with everybody. But I'll put a target on that list in general, just so I can set some goals and timelines for myself. Every 3 months or so, every 6 months or so, every 12 months or so. And there are people where I've had really profound connections in the past where, realistically, I only end up being in touch once a year. Now, there's a good thing about making the investment and having a meaningful connection from the get-go, because you know what it's like when you have friends in your life, you haven't talked to them for a long time, and then suddenly you reconnect and it's like you pick up exactly where you left off. You can do that if you make the investment up front to have not just a working relationship, but a relationship. So I think you got to use some judgment. You know, there's part science to this, part art. If you're starting to feel like you're being a pest, or you're feeling like you're calling too much, or you keep trying and you don't get a reply, well, I'm going to show you a specific example of how you can do it. I think the simple answer to that is, rather than keep doing the same thing over and over again, is you got to try something a little bit different. So if you're in the say what category, you may be thinking, look, it would just be awkward. You know, I have a history with this person of, you know, calling with my white papers and my research and my points of view. What are they going to think if I just call to say hello? That would be uncharacteristic and weird. And I had a participant in a workshop. I'd given the participants, as I will give you in just a moment, not a script to follow verbatim per se, but just some, you know, some opening lines to tailor and use as a way to get yourself into the conversation. And she kind of had that down, but then she looked up at me like a deer in headlights. Well, then, you know, what next? What do we say after I open the conversation? After I say, I just called to say how you are. So I'll give you some specific tips for that, but you may have a worry that, you know, it's just going to be this weird, awkward silence. We have a natural worry that they're going to respond negatively, especially let's say you're reconnecting with someone, you know, yeah, you had a meaningful relationship. There was a connection there, but let's be honest, the project didn't end as well as either one of you would have liked. You know, most of us tend to avoid those relationships. We find really good reasons not to be in touch on a regular basis, and we fear that if we reach out, things aren't going to be so happy. And the other thing we have to deal with is, what if I don't get them? I call or I text, SMS, and I don't get anything back. What do I do with that? What does that mean? So let's take a look at each one of those to help see if we can move past some of the inertia that naturally arises. If it feels awkward, the thought of reaching out to somebody what most of us do is we find a reason not to do it. We get very binary about it. We either have to call and be really awkward or not call at all. And what I would suggest to you is there's an alternative. And the alternative is to actually call it out. In our workshops, we call these caveats. They're little opening statements, they're little warnings, they're lead-ins. They give you a chance to actually put on loudspeaker the worries, fears, or concerns that might be preoccupying your mind. And if you've never called this person before just to say hello, you say, look, this is a little awkward, or this may seem out of the blue, or I'm doing something completely uncharacteristic for me here. But say it, just say that. If you feel uncomfortable because it's been far too long, then open with that. It's been a long time. Maybe there's an apology for you to offer. I've been completely remiss. I haven't been in touch with you since our project ended, which probably leaves you feeling like all I care about is the work as opposed to you. I put little musical notes on the slide because sometimes I love to bring in humor where it feels appropriate, lightens things up a little bit. I'll sometimes reference the old America song where it's a popular lyric, I've been one poor correspondent, I've been too hard to find. And with some people, like if I'm sending an email or an SMS text, I might even put a link to the song from YouTube or something. Look, better to do that and to move past the inertia than to continue the distance and the gap, because the longer you go, the harder it gets, for sure. Now, here's something else that's interesting. You could also lead with, I just had an aha about what it's like to be one of my clients. Because think about what your history is. If you're following conventional wisdom, you're doing what most of us have been taught. You only reach out when you need something, when you want something, when you have something to offer. Think for a minute about what it's like to be on the receiving end of that. Now, look, I'm not saying that there aren't clients who do value your point of view, but I'm saying, think about what your typical interactions are. It puts emphasis on the client. They got to do something. You give them a white paper. Maybe that's exactly what we need right now, what they need right now. Maybe it feels like homework, something else for them to do or to attend to on an already long to-do list. You're calling only because you have a demand. You need something from them, answers, resources, energy, something. And consider the breath of fresh air that it might be simply to call and let them know that you're interested in how they are. So you could lead with that. I've also had participants in workshops because in the last 18 months, I've started issuing this challenge, usually on lunch breaks and workshops. The assignment is go call a past client with whom you haven't been in touch in too long. You define what's too long, simply with no agenda other than to say hello. And I'll say, you can be completely honest and transparent. I'm in a workshop on how to build better trust-based relationships. And I'm realizing, this is something I don't do enough, or I just got an assignment to make a phone call. There's something so ridiculously simple and potentially very powerful about being human, being real, being very honest. So if you're in the we'll have nothing to talk about camp, well, here's the thing. Charlie and I defined 5 skills of building trust in the Trusted Advisor Fieldbook. One of them, inevitably, is the skill of improvisation. So this is where improv comes into play. And, the good news is there's something to be said, assuming that you do have a past relationship. Trust the relationship to carry you through. Trust the connections that you've had in the past. They usually rekindle pretty quickly. Keep it real. If it's just stutter and stammer in the beginning and it's a little awkward and neither one of you exactly knows what to say, you could say, I'm not sure what to say next. This is uncharacteristic for me, but I really just wanted to, break an old cycle and just see how you were. And you could do something that's novel for most of us who were trained as consultants, which is actually just be quiet for a beat or 2 or 4 in the conversation. We're so well trained at filling the void, talking, thinking that we have to build trust by proving ourselves, impressing our clients, instead of having a little space to see what arises in the conversation. I will tell you, most people who've done this on lunch breaks and as assignments from me, the challenge actually usually isn't that there's not enough to talk about. The challenge often is more, how do I get back in time after the lunch break? Because the clients tend to want to talk more and more.
We have a couple of questions that just popped up, Andrea. Somebody asked, what about leaving a message if you don't get them?
I'm a fan of that. You have a choice to, simply it's hang up or, you could hang up and leave nothing to call. I think you can say many of these things in a voicemail and bridge the gap. Hey, this is a little awkward, uncharacteristic, or I realize I've been a really poor correspondent, or I just called to say hello. The catch is you've got to manage what happens if you don't hear back right away or don't hear back. And that is about self-awareness and self-management, because more often than not, we humans are so gifted at making stories up about why people aren't responding to us, and we usually make it mean something about us and something negative. More often than not, people are just busy. But I'm a fan of leaving a message in workshops. I usually encourage people to do that, especially since, in the days of technology, right? I see, if you call me on my cell, I can see that there was a missed call. Maybe you're in my book and I see that it was you. And then I wonder, hey, how come she or he didn't leave a message?
We have one more pretty good question. Somebody said, when I keep it real, I tend to talk too much. Do you have any suggestions? I'm often talking with technology professionals who aren't very expressive.
Yeah.
Maybe keeping their cards close to the chest. So.
Yeah, I'm there. I'm right there with you, because brevity has never been my gift. I think the key is to remember the general guideline, whether you're keeping it real or just talking in general, see if you can keep it to, 60 to 120 seconds at a time, and then pause, give them a little space, keep going, try again, pause. Remembering to pause and take a breath. Again, it's allowing a beat or two in the conversation. Nobody's gonna die. Sometimes it feels like we're gonna die out of the awkwardness, but usually the time lapse in our minds is far longer than it is in reality. And especially if you're dealing with IT people, so I'm gonna overgeneralize, stereotype a bit here. Let's say if you're dealing with an introverted population, and a lot of IT people are, recovering IT consultant, I get to say that, and I am also an introvert. People need just a little bit of space. They need a beat or two. So I would say, see if you can limit yourself to a couple of sentences and then take a breath.
So just a quick antidote that I think is worth sharing from Arlene. She said when she makes those calls, she does leave a message and say that she'll call back to obviously keep the conversation going and not make it awkward. But she said that's also not implying that there's any pressure on them to reply. But often they call her back anyway.
That's great. Yeah, I like that very much. And sometimes I'll even explicitly say, hey, I'm sure you're busy, no obligation to call back. Because I don't want to end up being an unwelcome task on somebody's to-do list. If they feel inspired to call, great. So yeah, that's a great suggestion. I think we've got another one as well, Jason. Is there another tip?
Yep. So Tim just wrote in. He has a phone script that he uses for that kind of message. He uses it as a guide, for the real conversation if the person answers. Also does a little research, checking for news about the company to see if there's any open-ended questions that he can ask. But he said the prep gives him some tools to alleviate awkward silences and stuff.
Well, and I would encourage you to, I think that's great, and it's like professional improvisers, they prepare like crazy. They prepare in the form of practice, but they're willing. The key is, like a professional improviser, the key is a willingness to let it go in the moment. So I would, if you're not doing that already, Tim, and it sounds like maybe you are, I would encourage you and everybody else, sure, prepare. Remember, the purpose of this call and the reason that it's a different kind of sales call is your primary goal is to find out how they are. That's it. That really is it. And then let the rest go. If other things naturally arise in the conversation, great. Or if it makes sense to ask a question about, I don't know, recent promotion or changes in the organization, okay. But I'm trying to get you all to unhook yourself from feeling like you have to be driven by content and instead have your driver be making a connection in the relationship. And we'll see a link in just a moment to how that translates in the trust equation and how that ties to the two variables in the trust equation that most of us fail to spend enough time on. All right, so what happens if they respond negatively? So here's the thing. I think you get points for trying. You certainly get points from me for trying, and you'll most likely get points from the recipient of your communication for trying, even if they're not willing to admit it to you. A willingness to take a risk goes many, many miles towards trust building. In fact, it's one of the fundamentals of how trust works. Trust works is that it's positively correlated to risk. The more risk we take, the more trust we tend to build. So, look, at least you get points. You're actually going to learn something about your relationship, potentially, the quality of it or how they felt things were left, and so, maybe there's some repair work to be done. You get to decide whether it is or isn't worth it. What I will tell you is that I tried to do the calculations yesterday, I'm estimating somewhere around 600 people have done this, like real time, no kidding, inside of one of our workshops in the last 18 months. And a strong negative response has yet to be one of the results. And I promise you, I would have heard about it had it been the case, because they would have said, I knew I shouldn't have done that. Or the worst that has ever happened so far is that in response to a phone call, the caller got a text, an SMS message simply saying, I'm busy. and it wasn't particularly flowery or friendly or, I'll call you later, you're my BFF. It was simply, I'm busy, which could mean a lot of things, including simply, I'm busy. So, and for those of you struggling with if I leave a message and don't hear back, the strategy that we heard about gives you a way in to make another touch point if your message says, I'll try back to reach out to you. But what do you do in that case? And, you might just choose to let it be. It's okay. And practice that great self-awareness, self-management skill of not making everything be about you. You might choose to try again, and I would encourage you to try again. You might try in a slightly different way, or, you need to take a slightly bigger risk. And by the way, if you're in the camp of somebody who's been following your good consulting skills training, only calling clients when you have quote unquote something of value to offer, the first time you say you're calling just to say hello and see how you are, they might not actually believe you. You might have to do it a few times to be convincing. And can you blame them? I mean, look at it from their perspective. So taking a bigger risk could mean, I've got a great example. I actually took a message, an email of Charlie's from last week, and I modified it a bit because the scenario was slightly different. It wasn't just a call to say hello, but it was a case where he'd been in touch with a very high stakes client in a high stakes situation and hadn't heard anything to his surprise. So you could actually, if you called the first time, you could try an email next time, and you could say with a little bit of humor, or maybe even a lot of humor, I haven't heard back. I'm a naturally paranoid person, and I'm left guessing. And you give them a nice multiple choice. You're busy, you're on a great vacation and unplugged. My reach out was off-putting. You can own up. I'm naturally gravitating towards C, but I hope for both our sakes it's B. These may not be words that you choose. They may not be the multiple choice that feels genuine to you. You got to tailor it to work for you. But consider just finding new and different ways to actually interrupt the patterns and to look with all of the stimuli that we all have in our worlds these days. We've got to find a way to kind of cut through all of that noise in our clients' eyes.
I've got a quick question for you, Andrea. Do you have to consider this person to be some sort of friend in any capacity, or can it just be like, right?
No, not at all. I don't think so. I mean, look, there are, David Maister wrote a phenomenal article. He's the lead author, one of the original authors of the book, The Trusted Advisor. He wrote a great article about cultivating the habits of friendship so that we bring aspects of friendship into our working relationships, but you definitely don't have to be friends. There just needs to be some sort of past relationship, something existing that you can build on. So let's look at the connections. Why does all this actually build trust, and build trust quite quickly, in some ways much faster than our usual or our conventional strategies? If you look at the 4 variables of trustworthiness, we're trying to always increase credibility, reliability, intimacy. We want to keep our self-orientation as low as possible. So this tactic, this different kind of sales call, is working the intimacy and low self-orientation variables. Risk-taking, by its very nature, builds intimacy. Intimacy is what creates safety, connectedness, comfort, ease in your relationships. So your willingness to do this, to actually care about your clients and to let them know that you do, to call them in a different way than you ever have before, is going to boost your intimacy very quickly. And genuine caring is, I know, very few better ways to show low self-orientation very quickly. And there's another little magical thing that happens here, and it's key to truly call with no agenda. Like, if your client, if you call to say how they are and the conversation progresses and they suggest, hey, let's get together for lunch, or hey, you know what, as a matter of fact, we could really use your help on thus and such. Can we schedule a meeting? Great. That doesn't mean you've failed because you've gone off topic, but you notice what's happening there is the client's leading the way. They're opening the door for you. You're not calling with the agenda of getting a meeting. which is, by the way, what most consultants are taught to do, and not only taught, but measured on how many meetings you get. You're not calling with the agenda of getting a meeting, feigning that you're interested in finding out how they are. You're truly calling with no agenda other than to say hello. And there's a magical thing that happens, which is suddenly when you do that genuinely, you become very attractive because there's no pressure associated with you. You're not demanding something, wanting something, needing something, pushing something, hoping for something. You're simply connecting on a relationship basis. Now, the key is you got to do it for real. You can't say, oh, I learned this tactic in a webinar, so I'm really hoping that I'm going to get a meeting, but I'm going to lead with calling to say hello. Because our motives get communicated in so many ways, not the least of which is the thousands of nonverbal signals that we send on a regular basis. So for those of you who are in the duh camp or interested in hearing what I think are some very interesting stories, and by the way, these are direct quotes. Don't take it from me. Take it from people in our workshops who've actually tried this, and tried it not necessarily with a lot of advanced preparation because they're on lunch break, they got to eat, they got to check their emails, they got to check in with their team. Oh, and they have to do this homework assignment. Some of you might be thinking, well, this will work fine with people I've been in touch with fairly recently, and I've had people reach back out to clients they haven't talked to anywhere from 3 to 20 years. That's the largest range we've experienced so far. And imagine the case where you haven't been in touch with for 3 years and things haven't ended well or hadn't ended well. So it's risky to reach out. This particular person got an immediate reply and a lunch date requested by the client, and a key lesson learned, all the worry was for nothing. Many of you are going to struggle with calling with no agenda, calling without the purpose to sell. You've been taught that you're wasting your time and your client's time to do it any other way. What happens so many times, I need to start tracking the numbers of times. I'm going to say more than 50%. When you call without an agenda to sell, very often the client will sell themselves on you. They'll end up asking for help with a new assignment. To me, that's the best kind of business because I don't have to, remember, recovering reluctant salesperson. I don't have to knock down any doors. I don't have to push. Here's another case. Let's take the awkward, embarrassing situation of a client who had open heart surgery and you never followed up with them to see how they were. You call, you say, you feel badly about that. Long conversation ensues, advice gets asked for, meeting gets requested, and expression of appreciation for the call is the result. And you might be, to the question asked earlier about whether or not you need to be friends, you may be calling participant did. You go to hang up because you've got no agenda. Mission accomplished, right? You found out how they were, and what do you know? The director or the client leans in and says, before you go, and you end up talking for another hour. These are common results to this uncommon reach out strategy. And look, if nothing else happens, if you get no positive result whatsoever from doing 10 reach outs, which by the way won't happen, but let's say worst case scenario, if nothing else, you're building your courage muscle. And we learned through fascinating TED Talk, I'll be giving you a link to it, by an astronaut named Commander Chris Hadfield, who teaches us how through his training, he learned to actually, you can learn to overcome your primal fears. You just got to learn to build your courage muscle. So the more you do it, the easier it gets, the more courageous that you are. So this is a challenge. We're going to choose at random from people who've been posing questions. We'll give you one of the 3 books for free. And I've got another book available for somebody as soon as we hang up, 3 slides to go, to actually go for it. Now, you got time between now and the top of the hour. Take on the challenge. And if you're willing to write in chat, excuse me, the first name of the client you're going to reach out to, so we know you're taking this on in the next 16 minutes, we'll pull a name at random to give you a free book. Brief advertisement, by the way, for those of you who don't know our work, I've mentioned workshops. We've got online learning programs. We do custom programs, diagnostics. We've got some new and exciting things going on with coaching, especially for executives and senior leaders. Charlie's doing a great new podcast every 2 weeks, like a 2 or 3 minute recording, answering some of your toughest relationship questions. I highly recommend that. You don't have to submit an email address to get access to those kinds of resources that we provide. And by the way, I'll also be sending you a link to our video series. One of the free videos you can get, we've got 29, but we've got 5 available for any of you to watch anytime. One of them, lesson 27, has to do with this, making a different kind of sales call. So if you want to share some of the insights from this webinar in 3 minutes or less, you can do that by way of sharing the video. Whole list of free stuff that we'll be providing by email to those who registered, including links to this recording, the videos, the TED Talk I mentioned, more on the trust equation, a couple of other articles for you. Now that said, we're right at 12:45. I'm happy to hang out if you have any questions that remain. Don't let that be your excuse though for not going and making the phone call. And when Jason's also going to pull up our second and last poll, which asks you before you sign off, if you are signing off right now, to tell us how valuable this was for you. Then I'm going to officially close the webinar and say thank you to all, and I'll hang out if any other questions come up.
We have a lot of people. We have a lot of people writing the names of people they're going to call, which is excellent. So
yes, yeah, it is. Tracy is going to be a lucky recipient. Bill, Tyler, fabulous.
Somebody asked about the recording. We will be sending out a recording of the full webinar. It'll come in your email.
Yes.
Does anybody have any other questions on the topic? Because we'll stay for a few minutes and answer questions. Feel free to email Andrea or myself, and we can continue the conversation. The other thing I was going to mention, which we'll put in the email, we can link to the trust equation if people aren't familiar with that in the email as well. Great. Well, thanks everybody for attending. I think that'll wrap it up. If there's no more questions, Andrea, you want to say anything before we go?
I just want to say thank you. I
Awesome.
appreciate everybody joining, and good luck with those phone calls.
Thanks a lot, everybody. Take care. And if you go to in the email, there'll be a link to our next webinar in December, hosted by Charlie Green, on building trust within an organization and within a culture. So thanks a lot. Take care, everyone.